Hello, and welcome to the Finding Your Freedom podcast, the show for high-achieving professionals who want success that feels as good as it looks. Each week, expect real conversations that help leaders drop the mask, lead with confidence, and align work with what truly matters. Today's conversation is about making the jump from top performer to leader without losing what makes work feel good and real. A high-stakes journey from Cuba's three-currency chaos. That's where I actually met this guest, believe it or not, in Cuba, to APAC cold starts, accidental leadership, and the leap from VP of sales to coaching founders and sales leaders to scale without burning out. Today's guest is Dave Ascott, a startup sales operator turned coach. Dave Ascott helped take an AI startup from first sales hire to serious growth, and he shares exactly how to build credibility from nothing, set standards and get results through a team without suffocating them. We get into the hard bits, staying calm when the stakes are high, enforcing processes you once ignored yourself, and deciding when to coach someone up versus hire differently. Nuggets we talk about in the conversation are being intentional about leadership style, defining non-negotiables, values and the culture to build, then use that North Star to make faster, better decisions under pressure. Lead without micromanaging, set clear standards and processes that fit the company's stage. We talk about confidence versus uncertainty. It's normal to feel uncertain while needing to project steadiness. Acknowledge unknowns privately and decide small. Test fast and let results rebuild confidence. I would say this, but we get into using a coach as a blind spot mirror. The biggest issue often surfaces only through a neutral party challenging you and helping you avoid costly mistakes. Okay, let's get into it. Dave, it's fantastic to have you with us here today on the Finding Your Freedom podcast. It's been one I've been looking forward to speaking to you for a while now. We obviously first got to know each other many years ago when we were put together in Cuba, and that was an amazing experience. It was it's like a different lifetime ago, wasn't it? But thanks very much for being on the podcast. And please, could you just maybe start by introducing yourself and tell us about if you were to write a story of your life so far, what would the main chapters be?
I guess like a lot of people, you kind of go to school, don't you? And then I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I sort of didn't have that kind of like, I really want to be a teacher or I really want to be a doctor. And so I kind of, the first thing that probably had a big impact on me actually, funnily enough, was Cuba. Before uni, I was pretty keen to get away. I was pretty keen to do something, and I signed up for that organization, Project Trust. They send kids all over the world on projects, and I got placed with you in Cuba, and I think it was a real eye opener for me. At 18, teaching students who are older than me, and the makeup of the country at that time, as you'll remember, was sort of fascinating and challenging. So they had three currencies operating at once. Foreigners were restricted on the transport they could use, the currency they could pay in. And we obviously had that ID that meant we could operate as locals, but no one really recognized that. No one really understood it. So I often sort of think that my first experience of negotiating, deal making, haggling really came from endlessly arguing with people in Cuba to say, no, we can't do that. No, we should be allowed to do this sort of thing. So it was I think a really great lesson. I think the other thing I always take away from that is I'm a massive advocate of living and working in a different country because of it. You can visit places, you can travel, but when you queue up and queue for bread with people, or you're chatting to them, or you're really a part of the rhythm of the place. You kind of only really get that by living there. So that was a few things I sort of took from that, I guess. I got back, went to university, did psychology. I'd always been fascinated by what made people tick, and particularly how that impacts our performance, and how well we do things. There's just countless examples in life that you see all of the time. Like in sports, you've got home and away, right? You can have a team that pretty much loses every away game but wins every home game, and then sometimes you get teams that do the opposite. They've got a great away record, and it sort of makes zero sense because it's the same rules, the same pitch, the same team, the same everything, and yet there's something underneath it that drives that, right? So always been really kind of fascinated in that side of things. Then next chapter, I guess, after uni, went traveling again. I got some advice that said, hey, whatever you do, don't go away for 3 months and then come back, because you'll just be itching to go traveling away. So again, so they said, look, make sure you go for a proper amount of time. So went for about 15 months. And to fund it, I worked in Canada and also worked in New Zealand. I think what was interesting was that having worked in Cuba before, which was so different, and then working in these places that are ostensibly much more similar to the UK, I realized quite early on that there's different ways that people approach things. There's different ways that people do things. There's certainly not one way to doing things. And then getting back the kind of, sort of reality of life, I had to get a job. So first big job was a kind of, or first job was a sort of big corporate. It's difficult to sum up, but I think something that always sticks in my mind is the selection process. So it's like quite an old school one where you had like 2 days. Day one, learn about the space, learn about the product, learn about the company, big dinner, fair amount of drinking in the evening, and then bright and early the next day, it's like, okay, arithmetic, mental reasoning, role play with difficult customers, like that sort of thing, really sort of putting you through your paces after a few drinks the night before. I'm not sure if organizations still do that. That feels like that might be a bit old school now, but yeah, so did that. I learned an incredible amount of that job. Had a great boss. Things like negotiation skills, all these sort of other things kind of came through. But one of the things I realized quite early on was it's like, this world isn't quite for me. It's not, I don't see myself being in this. I don't know what I want to do, but I don't see myself being in these big organizations for the whole, for my whole career. So I transitioned to startups. I think that's, when you look at the big moments in your life, I guess that transition to startups was big. I really quickly realized it was the place for me. It was the responsibility you had, the freedom to try things, to take decisions, the autonomy, it all really sort of suited me. First of all, I was in an organization of about 50 people. So, more established as an organization, sort of starting up, scaling up. I did a variety of different roles there. One of the more interesting, probably the more challenging was being asked to go down to Australia and sort of try and grow new business in APAC. Learn a lot of things about things like credibility when no one knows who you are, no one's heard of you, no one's heard of your company, how you establish credibility. Also learned that there's a massive difference between no friends and one friend. Like that 0 to 1 is the biggest friendship jump you will ever make. Someone said to me, "Oh, who do you know in Sydney?" And I was like, "Oh, no one." They were like, "Oh, right. Who do you know in Australia?" I was like, "Yeah, actually, no one." So I was sort of dealing with those two challenges, like the personal challenge of basically having no friends, needing to find some, and then the business challenge of like trying to grow revenue at the same time, right? So yeah, lots of learnings to talk about it forever, but I won't, as this is brief chapters of my life. And then back in 2016, I was looking for really early stage startup. I was looking for great core team, great technology. And I found an AI analytics startup. I joined as employee number 3. So I was the first sales hire. It was a really interesting product. It was a really evangelical sell. You were really trying to get people to buy into a whole new way of doing things, a whole new sort of technology. I know AI is talked about like endlessly and a lot now, but you don't have to go back that far. If you go back 10 years, the conversations about AI were very different. So yeah, I was initially closing deals myself. So classic sort of first sales hire journey, really. I was initially closing the deals myself, and then I built the sales team and the process and that side of things to secure first Series A, and then continue to grow it to secure to deliver the sort of revenue, sales revenue to secure Series B. And I think next and penultimate significant change I'd say is I switched to 4 days a week. I started to do coach training and building my experience as a coach on the 5th day on the Friday. And then finally, last December, I took the plunge and switched to coaching full time. So yeah, I now work with new sales leaders in tech startups to help them transition from being that individual contributor to leading teams, to delivering results that the business needs through their teams. And so yeah, that's probably in a sort of slightly longer nutshell, the sort of journey of the life so far.
No, I mean, there's so many things we could jump into that, and you certainly brought a few funny memories back from Cuba. I certainly remember queuing with you one morning from about 4 o'clock to try and get a train ticket, and then we queued and got a ticket, which allowed us to get into another queue at that evening at 7 p.m. And we thought we'd nailed it, and we'd actually screwed it up. And even though we'd spent about blooming 12 hours queuing, we'd screwed it up. We didn't even have the right train ticket, but we managed to. We just went on the train anyway, and then I think we pretty much bribed the train conductor to let us. We had a whole carriage to ourselves. So yeah, that was just one of many, wasn't it, of funny stories of our time in what was pretty a wacky experience in Cuba. And then I was thinking when you were talking there about being very candid about having no friends in Australia and having to find them and start again. What was that like? Did that stand you in good stead, having
Yeah, I
that
think so.
experience in
I
Cuba?
think it's it's a sort of a weird thing as a grown up not having any friends or not having a network because we didn't have an office. There was only 3 people in APAC. So yeah, I think it's sort of in terms of sort of pushing you outside your kind of comfort zone. It's actually, funnily enough, a lot easier to get outside your comfort zone when you're sort of forced to. And if you don't have any sort of mates, basically, you're kind of forced to sort of reach out to people, like sort of be a bit more kind of bold in terms of sort of finding them you otherwise would be, and you also sort of roll the dice a bit more, right? If someone says, "Oh, I know someone who knows someone who," whatever, you're like, "Hey, yeah, let's meet up, let's have a chat," type thing. So it kind of, it's a great, yeah, you learn, there's little techniques and funny things that you learn. Like if you go into a bar, you always want to sit at the bar because that's where conversation happens. If you carve a table out on your own and sit there, no one will come and talk to you ever. But if you're at the bar, people will chat as they're buying drinks, and it kind of, it sort of builds up from there and that sort of thing. And also when you're watching sport, like it's totally legitimate to sort of start speaking to somebody about the sport you're watching, right? That's like totally accepted behavior. But if you walked into a pub and started chatting to the people next to you, the first few days, I literally know one, and I was like, well, I'd like go out for a dinner or a drink. That kind of sense of like, if there's sport on, you can start talking to people, and then the conversation flows and you go from there. So yeah, all sorts of weird little things that you can't heard, and then I got some introductions from some mates, and they started coming through, and yeah, all changed. But yeah, definitely learned a few things, I think.
Yeah. So tell us more about your journey from, I guess it sounds like you started off in the AI company doing the sales, and then you became a sales leader. Is that how you
Yeah,
describe
so I
it?
think
And
I'm
tell us
sort
a bit
of
more about that
in
journey.
if you look at kind of the sort of my career as a whole, or whatever, I'd probably say I'm what you call like an accidental sales leader, and there's loads of us out there, right? We didn't grow up of sort of dreaming of like closing deals or managing pipeline or updating a CRM system. We just had this idea that we wanted to be successful without knowing what that looked like, right? And if you're a bit of an all rounder, you're reasonably good with people, you've got a good work ethic, you back yourself, and you really value freedom, then and that concept of being judged on what you deliver, then sales is going to tick a lot of those boxes, and sales in a startup even more so because you've got more freedom, more flexibility, more opportunity, right? And leadership then provides a new challenge. It's a chance to have a greater impact on the organization's success, to really help and grow and build something. And I think we've all, when either doing management or leadership previously, or just working with other people, the impact that a great manager can have, and you want to have that impact, that same effect on others as well.
Mm. And what was your particular leadership style, and
Yeah,
how
that's
did you
that's a
find
good
it?
question. I think leadership is a very personal thing. I think there's not one way to lead. You And I think as you're kind of becoming a leader, like there are things that you're not comfortable with that you have to do anyway. So like uncomfortable conversations, you have to do them. That's part of the role, right? But then there are other things that maybe you see other people doing that would make you feel uncomfortable that you don't have to do, right? So you get to choose how you have those uncomfortable conversations, right? For example, you get to treat the individual with respect, or approach it however you see fit, right? You don't have to go, "Oh, I just call a spade a spade. I'm just blunt. That's the way I am." You don't have to take that approach if you don't want to. You can take an approach that works for you. So I think leadership's a very sort of personal thing. There's obviously things that you have to do, but how you do it is going to be, it's going to be unique to you. Your strengths, your weaknesses, what you value, what you see as important, the type of team you want to build, the type of culture you want to create. So I think being really clear and intentional on the type of leader you want to be, and on what's important to you, what sort of North Star is, these sort of things, is really important, because when you're making all these decisions, you're making so many different decisions. So having that kind of guiding light that you either sort of subconsciously, or you can actually consciously hold up a potential decision or course of action against it and say, is this the approach I want to take? Is something that I think is really useful. But yeah, I'd say it's a very personal thing. There's loads of ways to be a great leader, right? You've got charismatic and this, you've got kind of quiet and understated as that, you've got leading by example, you've got loads of different ways of doing it. There's some non-negotiables for sure, but stylistically, and also because you're spending your whole life doing it, you spend a ton of time at work. It's going to be draining and tiring and exhausting if you're putting on an act the whole time. Whereas if you can be authentic, I know authenticity might sound a bit sort of authenticity, but it's like if you can genuinely be authentic and do something in a way that you're comfortable with, you can find it energizing, invigorating, rather than a bit sort of draining. So I think it's important to do it your way because you'll be better at it. You'll be able to do it for longer, and the people that you lead will also perform better and do better, which is ultimately, what you're looking to do as a leader, especially as a sales leader, right? You're looking to grow revenue effectively through the team that you have.
Fantastic. I need to write some of this down. So that's exactly the areas that I'm been coaching people in, and just I've been trying to stay away from this authenticity word because I think it feels a bit like kind of coaching languagey and sort of say, just be real, be true to yourself or something. It all sounds a little bit out there, but yeah, it's all the same thing, isn't it? It's like just being yourself, because we know, a lot of us know what it's like to turn up and put a kind of corporate mask on, right? And just be a different person. And I think for me, that was part of the journey about moving from, I think what happens is you go into the workplace and you're sort of looking around you, looking at what everyone else is doing. And that's where the sort of mask starts. And then later on, you're looking around and you maybe recognize things in yourself that you don't particularly like. And you're thinking, why am I saying or doing it that way? It doesn't really feel good to me. How can I change it? So yeah, definitely. So what was your specific style then? How would you categorize yourself, or without putting yourself in a box, what would you say were your
actually, I might just go back
strengths
on
and
what you said a
weaknesses?
moment ago first. Was the point you made? The point you made there was really interesting because you look around.
Yeah,
A
sure.
lot of the time, we're sort of learning how to lead through osmosis. We're learning how to lead by like looking at people who've done it well and going, oh, I want to be a bit more like that, or people who've done it badly and gone, I never want to be that guy. Like something that comes up a lot in the conversations I have is like micromanaging, right? Nobody wants to be micromanaged. Now, obviously, micromanagement is a scale, right? It's a spectrum that your micromanagement might be by just being on it, but bearing that in mind, nobody wants to be micromanaged. So loads of people are like, I definitely don't want to be a micromanager, right? I need the team to do what I need them to do, but I don't want to micromanage because I've always hated that. I've sort of heard lots of different things where people say, I definitely don't. Funnily enough, often the first thing you say, hey, what kind of leader do you want to be? Often the first thing that people say is, well, I'll tell you what I don't want to be. They often haven't thought exactly like who they do want to be. And as you say, that kind of that corporate mask of like being how you need to be. There's it's not to say that sales leadership is the most difficult type of leadership. I'm not going to sort of push that because it's not a competition. But one of the challenges of leading a sales team is that you need to be confident all the time, right? Because that's the job, right? It's the currency. So like the customer wants to see that you're confident, right? Your team needs to see that you're confident in what you're doing and the direction you're taking them in. Leadership above, you're responsible for revenue, a big part of the revenue for the organization. They want to see that guy confident, right? Who wants to see the guy that's responsible for revenue as not confident? No one, right? Everyone wants that guy to be damn confident, right? But the problem is, especially in a startup and to be honest, in any roles, you're going to be uncertain on stuff. You're doing something that's never been done before. The organization is evolving, changing. There will be questions, there will be doubts. It's just inevitable. So you've got this kind of split between this need to project confidence because that's what the role effectively requires, and the reality, which is that sometimes you don't know the answer and you're not sure and you need to figure it out. So over and above the kind of corporate, or not corporate mask, but that kind of that work persona or the general kind of thing, you've also got this almost like the nature of the job is that you need to project a certain level of confidence. And obviously when you've got a discrepancy between how you're feeling inside and how you're sort of acting outside, again, that can be one of those things where it can be a little bit tiring, that can be a little bit sort of draining, right? So that's one of the sort of challenges that kind of comes, when looking at startup sales leadership. That's a sort of a challenge that kind of can be really, you can see quite a lot, I suppose.
What about your journey from being the VP of sales into coaching? What made you make that
Yeah, I think my
transition?
sort of my journey in a general sense has always been one of gradually kind of working out and getting a bit clearer on what I like to do, right? And you know, my first ever role, for example, negotiation was a massive part of that job. You got given fantastic training and I enjoyed it. But if you said to me like, would you like that to be all that you do? I'd sort of say, oh no, that's not, you know, it's a part of it, but it's not everything. And I think one of the things I really love about early stage startups is it's a fascinating puzzle to be solved, right? Every startup is unique. So when you combine the product, the market, what the competitors look like, their strengths, their weaknesses, the stage they're at, the pressure they're under based on like the amount of runway they've got, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everything is always going to be slightly different. And you've got certain rules of the game. You know, this is the product we have, this is the amount of runway we have, and then you're figuring out how to win within those parameters, right? And I really love that. But I also especially love how it interacts with the human side of things, right? So, you know, I mentioned earlier on how I sort of really interested in performance, how people tick, what you can do on that side of things. And the startup setup inherently means uncertainty, it means pressure, it means operating with limited information. And when you combine those things with being a sales leader, or especially being a new sales leader, you know, developing your approach, looking to take the right decisions more often than not, trying to avoid costly mistakes. I really enjoy working with sales leaders in startups to help them solve that puzzle. So it was kind of like I enjoyed the doing, and I also really enjoy the kind of the sort of working it out and the solving it. And I have had some great coaching throughout my career, but I at one stage I had a sort of you know, when I was taking on more responsibility, I got a coach who worked with him for 6 months, and he was sort of game changing for me in terms of really helping me to figure out some of the problems I had. And because there's a funny thing about sort of smaller organizations is that sometimes if someone said, who sells this the best in the world, it would be like, well, sort of me, because, you know, there's only this group of people that sells it, and I've been doing it for longest type thing, you know, not. And so you're then looking to, you have the knowledge and the information, but you're still trying to figure it out. And sometimes having like an independent sounding board, someone who can challenge you, push you to sort of look at your blind spots, all that side of things, helps you to get there so much quicker than if you're trying to figure it out yourself. And what I really loved about it, and one of the sort of things that I really enjoy about what I do is you're impartial, right? You want them to be successful. You're trying to help them to be successful, but you're not part of the organization, right? So they can be completely honest with you, and equally you can push and challenge them, and they know there's no concern that like, if they say the wrong thing, like then they're going to look bad or anything. It's like, no, we're just in this together to figure out the best solution in the quickest possible way. So I really appreciate working with a coach to help me find the answer, basically. It was the conversations with him that sort of, I realized basically, I was like, that's the area for me, you know, like that's the specific spot that I want to be working with these people to solve this problem. As a coach, that was how the sort of transformation happened. I actually did some advising first of all. So I was advising organized startups. I was advising them, and but the reality is that things are changing so quickly. They have been for a long time, but now with AI, things change. Things changing every few months, right? We're constantly figuring out how to make the best use of new technology. Things that worked in the past may not work so well anymore. You know, there's that constant, you know, pace of change. And so on the one hand, it was incredibly useful for me to be able to understand the terrain they're operating in. Like, it's like, I've walked in your shoes. I've done this role, the roles you're going to go on to. I've done that. I understand that terrain. I've faced some of these challenges. I've struggled with some of the things that you struggled with. But on the flip side, the sort of learning and training to be a coach, so that I had the skills and the tools to help you figure it out. It was that kind of combination that I found was really powerful. Whereas when I was just advising, I've always felt like there was something a little bit missing. And so, yeah, that was kind of my journey really, from you know, working in an organization, or working in my last organization, to transitioning and taking the plunge, and initially doing it one day a week, and then now doing it full time.
Yeah, fantastic. So now, what do you find the most rewarding aspect of the job then?
That's a good question. It's working with people to help them find the answer, right? You know, and what you what you almost always find is that when someone sort of co-authors or authors a plan, they're always way more bought into it than they'd be if you just walked in and said, "Hey, I think you should do this," right? And so working with someone to, find the right solution for them, and then obviously I work with people regularly. So what's going to happen is they're going to implement, see the benefit or see the change, come back. We're going to work on something else. Sometimes it doesn't work. Like I sort of was working with somebody reasonably recently, and they was this thorny problem. We'd been trying to figure it out, and there was like, during the conversation, we got to the point. It's like, I think that's it. Whatever. It's like, okay, great. How can we test it quickly? How can we find out? 2 weeks later, it came back and said, "I tell you what, mate, it's definitely not that." And it was like, fine. Sometimes it will be that, and then they cracked it the next time, right? Because the next time, but the key thing, I suppose, was that it was like, could it be this? Yeah, I think it might be. Is it possible to test it? Yeah, right. Let's test it. Let's see. Does it work? No, it didn't. Okay, fine. You've learned something, right? Because I often think if the answer was easy, you'd have already figured it out, right? When someone says like, if you're ever struggling between an easy decision and a hard one, you take the hard decision, because if the easy decision was the right answer, you'd have done it without thinking, right? And sometimes there is that kind of concept of like, when you're working through some of this stuff, if it was easy, it wouldn't be a problem. You wouldn't be discussing it. You'd have already figured it out. So sometimes you do have that kind of iterative approach to getting to where you want to get to. But yeah, I think that's the thing I enjoy the most, is like helping people solve problems that are sort of unique to them. They're a combination of like, I need to help make this business more money this quickly. I've got these problems with or these challenges with the team, or this, that, or the other, or whatever. It could look like anything really. And with them as the individual, right? Because it could be that, as I mentioned, that pressure earlier, where you've got the kind of like, oh, I'm sort of caught in the middle, and I can't really express the fact that I'm unsure. Like, just giving them the opportunity to be like, you know what, I don't know, let's figure it out, can be, people find it really valuable, and I in turn really enjoy it as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that's come up quite a lot for me recently, is like, the quicker that you can get to a no's, the quicker you can get to a yes type thing. You're learning quickly, learning from the no's, moving on, like you say. And what are some of because you mentioned, unique challenges there, but I'm wondering, what are some of the kind of common challenges that you're coming up against and working with people on?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, one of those
again.
things is that, or one of the things you realize very quickly when you work with different people with different levels of experience in different organizations, you quite quickly realize that there are common challenges. Everyone's feeling and experiencing them differently, but there are really common challenges that exist. Maybe I'll mention a couple of them in a moment, but it's like one of those things where it's like, if anyone who's ever sort of felt these, it's like they're definitely not alone. Like it's sort of, they're very common. And, I think stepping up from being an individual contributor to being a leader is hard, basically. So, Gartner found that 60% of new leaders actually fail within the first 24 months, right? So 2 in 3 of the kind of bright, capable, ambitious people who step up to lead teams don't make it a success, right? So that they're high potential, they know how to sell, they've proven their worth, and they've been promoted on that basis, and yet they're not able to make the step up and make it work. And startups, obviously, the stakes are higher, or the stakes are higher. The timeframes are shorter. The pressure is greater in terms of every quarter really matters, right? You've got limited runway, limited time to hit the numbers, limited time to prove things. And so in sales, when you're responsible for delivering a big part of the revenue to kind of keep the lights on and going to get the organization to the next funding round, you wouldn't be human if you didn't feel some of the pressure of that. Some of the sort of challenges that kind of flow on from learning on the job, under time pressure, with responsibility is you're not an individual contributor anymore. You're a leader, so you succeed through the team, right? And your success now depends on people who work differently than you do. So you find yourself leading people with different personalities, different approaches, different levels of commitment. Some are going to be meticulous with details, but they struggle to close. And others are natural closers, but they neglect kind of the more sort of administrative side of the role, right? So one person might be the sort of person that actually benefits from reassurance, and someone else could sort of slightly bristle at any kind of suggestion, right? They're just different people. And so new leaders, you're trying to sort of figure it out how to lead them all effectively while typically desperately trying to avoid being that micromanager that you've always hated. So you want to trust the team, but you want to see that trust respected. And I personally, some days I can remember thinking like, I know that not everyone operates the same way that I did, but it would be a hell of a lot easier if they did. But the funny thing is, even more than that, it's not even quite as simple as that, because the real kicker perhaps is that as a leader, you need to enforce certain processes and standards that, if you're really honest, you didn't always prioritize when you were in that position, right? So updating your pipeline might not have been the top of your to-do list when you were busy trying to hit your number as an AE, right? But now as a leader, it's essential for your reporting and your forecasting. So you're sort of saying, oh, you need to do that. So it can sort of be hard not to feel sort of almost slightly hypocritical on some days. There's obviously all the elements of like the mechanical stuff, sales process, the right approach for the organization at the current stage. But I think on a personal level, another thing that's quite kind of common is that you feel more isolated than you have done before. And perhaps that's another difference between leading in a large organization and leading in a slightly smaller one. In a larger one, you maybe have more of a peer set of managers who are at your level or something like that. But as a sales leader in a startup, you're not part of the team anymore. So, you've been removed from the WhatsApp group, or there's a new one quietly started without you. There's like a natural distance. You can't vent your frustrations as you once would have done if you were in a team or if you were peers with people. And they, on their side, don't see all of the pressure that you're under either, right? So you're juggling whether you can turn an underperformer around, how much time it would take, how that stacks up to hiring someone new. The team just see a team member who's missing targets, right? And you can't always be 100% transparent with leadership either, because you need to advocate for your team. You need to explain misses away without throwing people under the bus whilst you're working with them to sort it out. You need to maintain confidence in your ability to fix things. So that kind of feeling of being caught in the middle, absorbing pressure from both directions, it's isolating, and it can actually feel, most people, you don't necessarily admit it sort of very often, but it can actually feel a bit lonely to be sat in that position. So there's the technical challenges of it, what's the right process for us at the right time. I went to an event yesterday and it said the average go-to-market team now uses 34 different pieces of technology. So, you've got questions about which technology to implement, when's the right amount of process at what stage. Yeah, you've got all that. And then you've got the kind of almost like the sort of the leadership style, like how do I work with different people and different approaches? How do I give autonomy but maintain trust? And then you've probably got the internal stuff, which is like, how do I remain energized, remain kind of up for it? Because it's ultimately, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's not about hitting the numbers one quarter. You're trying to repeatedly deliver to allow you to get to the next stage or for whatever the business needs. So I think I'd say those are some of the common things there's quite a lot, but I'd say those are some of the ones I'd pick out to sort of almost illustrate like technical, team-based, internal, perhaps you could summarize them, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really good illustration, and I think it sounds challenging. Really painting that picture of like, who wants that job? And maybe
it's a fascinating job, because you're like early on, what you do really matters, right? As a sort of sales team in an earlier stage startup, you can have sort of deals that almost like change the course of the company's history type thing. It has that sort of feeling about it. And I think, like sort of first job, I remember one day I was sort of thinking, I could have the best year or the worst year. This company was founded in like 1866. It was like, massive company, global, whatever. And it was like, I could have the best year in the world and nobody would, almost like nobody cared. Not because people were being mean, but simply because it just wouldn't make a dent. Whereas, in that early stage, when you're closing those early deals, there's challenges of it, but you get to have an impact, and you also get to figure out what works, right? It's like there's a real, creative is maybe not the right word. It's a puzzle to be solved, and you're working as part of a small team, because the rest of the organization is helping you too, right? It's not the sales team is like inextricably linked with everybody else in the organization. You're all working towards the same goal, and so you feel like you're part of this team or this group trying to make something happen, and that gives you a real energy. All it does.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, it is a bit life and death, isn't it? You've got to kind of make it, or you talk about the runway, money's going to start running out. I mean, I worked on, unfortunately, a lot. I worked on a lot of startups that didn't make it because I was involved in corporate restructuring jobs. So I sort of went into teams that had unfortunately just been told, that's it, the runway's just done. There's no more money, or they were working with an investor and they're usually getting money into the bank account every 3 months, whatever it was. And then the investors just said, nah, we don't believe in this anymore, and pulled the plug. So I think that sort of, you're living on a knife edge, aren't you, in that startup world? I mean, I don't have that much experience of it apart from going in when it went wrong, but I can imagine it's quite
yeah. And I mean, obviously
it's quite high stakes,
that's great,
isn't
right?
it?
Like, it's almost like you've got responsibility comes with pluses and negatives, right? In terms of like, or like the fact that you could have a really successful few quarters or year and it could have a real impact is brilliant. It does mean, obviously, if you do the flip side and it doesn't go so well, then it has a negative impact, sort of a sizable impact either way. So it's almost like it's like, what do you pick what suits you, right? And I think, the vast majority, I sort of forget the stats, but whatever, like, 1 in 10 startups make it to a millions revenue, ARR, whatever, and say maybe, I don't know what the stat is that makes it to 10 or whatever like that. But yeah, the odds are sort of a bit stacked against you. But I suppose one of the things I say about a lot of the leaders or a lot of the new sales leaders I talk to is, it's kind of like, it's a unique gig, that earlier stage, right? It's different being a sales leader in, sort of seed, Series A, Series B than it would be in a massive organization. They're almost like completely different roles. One, you're kind of optimizing and tweaking what works. This big oversimplification, of course, but you've got something that really works, and you're looking to develop it and make it even better. Another at the other end of the spectrum, you're kind of completely finding out what works. It's sort of like, you're figuring out what works. And it has impact for, like, the type of person you hire. Like the sort of the people you hire early on are going to look very different to when you've already got a team of 30 and you know exactly what works and you've got all the collateral and everything as well. So it's what's I suppose interesting about sort of sales and sales leadership is there's almost like a flavor for everybody. You could be like more finding out what works, working with small teams, through to optimizing massive teams globally and that sort of thing. There's kind of, and they each have different challenges. They each have different sort of positives, different negatives. Some of the internal challenges I mentioned are actually quite common across the piece, whereas maybe the sort of mechanical challenges look quite different. Do you know what I mean? And maybe the team-based challenges reasonably common across the piece. The likelihood is you're going to work with different people. But yeah, I'd say the internal challenges, funnily enough, are quite concurrent across different stages. The actual mechanics of the job might look a little bit different. Bit of a simplification, but
yeah. I'm wondering if you could sort of go back in time and talk to yourself when you were first becoming a leader. What's the one piece of advice you kind give yourself at that point in time that would have helped you? I think you talked about earlier, like helping people kind of shortcut the journey. What would one gem be that you'd give yourself?
I'd been leading for a number of years before I got a coach, and it was kind of game changing for me. I know this is the role I do, but it's obviously what inspired me to do what I do now. I guess I was the expert in the organization I was in, the things I was doing, of course, but I think one of the things that really can be helpful is that it's really easy for other people to see blind spots, and it's a lot harder for you to see blind spots, for example. So, even this actual concept of a blind spot, right? If you're in the car, there's a blind spot somewhere behind you. If somebody stood outside the car, they can see behind you. It's like, it's chalk and cheese, right? And I think somebody to sort of help you with kind of with blind spots is and like to challenge you in the right way, that sort of thing, to push you about the leadership style. I for me was game changing, and obviously it's something that I do. But I think if I was to distill it down to a point that wasn't that, I'd probably say be intentional about the type of leader you want to be. So don't just sort of sleepwalk into concepts of like, I don't really like that, I don't really want to be like that, they were a good leader, and be really intentional. You're going to be taking tons of decisions all the time. what's really useful is to have a kind of concepts, values, North Stars, however you define it, but things that you can sort of, that are like non-negotiable, or that are whatever, or that is the way that you want to behave, the way that you want to operate, the type of culture you want to build. Being clear on what they are then allows you to make decisions viewed through that prism. And if you're struggling with something, you can go back to that and go, well, hey, what I believe is important is this. Doing that clearly wouldn't be that. Helps you to make those decision makings, because it helps you to make those decisions. I suppose it's a little bit perhaps like having a constitution, although I know that doesn't always solve problems. But it's a little bit like having a constitution where you can go back to it and go, oh well, the second point says we never behave like complete, whatever. We're always decent. And then you look at it and you go, oh well, this wouldn't be behaving in a decent manner, would it? So the right sort of option. Obviously, that's not quite what I mean, but yeah, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. So it's that intentionality about this kind of, you mentioned North Star earlier, having a kind of where you want to say kind of grounding around who you are and what type of leader you want to be, so you can kind of go back and reference that when things get tough, because presumably things get pretty tough in this world we've just been talking about.
It's sort of I guess lots of jobs like there's a pressure, and especially any sales job where you're sort of almost only as good as your last few targets in a way, and I think that intentionality is kind of key. I think the other thing is that if you're working towards something, when you make a mistake, it's kind of easier to give yourself a break, because you're like, oh, I'm working towards this, I want to do this, I want to achieve that. That didn't quite work. Fine, I'll do it slightly differently next time. If you don't have the clarity as to where you're trying to get to, you know what I mean, and you make a mistake, it's almost like, can I even do this? Do you know, it's a slightly different. It sort of positions you in a slightly different place. Mm-hmm. So I think, it's almost like finding the answer as I was talking about it. But I'd go, be clear on the kind of leader you want to be. Like, think about leaders you respect, leaders you admire, and then you can think about the ones that you maybe the opposite. What your sort of values are, what's important to you, like how you want to approach it, the kind of culture you want, that sort of thing. And then you can try and work towards getting there. When you make mistakes, you can course correct. You may actually revisit them and go, you know what, actually I was slightly wrong. Now with more experience, whatever, I believe this. But I'd say, be intentional in the way that you would about a lot of things, but with something like leadership. Because often people step up to from being an individual contributor, not just in sales, in a lot of different roles. They step up to being from being an individual contributor to being leader. It's like, you're brilliant at being an individual contributor, now lead. And it's almost like it's a completely different skill set, and I'll your final point on that, I suppose, but to illustrate the point with sales, as an individual contributor, you're going to be selfish with your time. You're going to be, ruthless in what you do and what you do not do. It's fine to be the hero a little bit, like that's okay, like closing deals and it's celebrating it. But when you step up to being a leader, it's like you need to be more generous with your time. You obviously still need to focus it, but you're going to be coaching other people, helping other people. You're not going to take it's your fault when it goes wrong, but the individual is the person that succeeds when it goes right. So it's a fundamentally different mindset, a fundamentally different set of skills. Coaching somebody to be better at doing something is very different to being good at it yourself. They're completely different skills. So I think there is that point around when you step up. Often you don't necessarily get the guidance, and then if you don't know what sort of version of a leader you want to be either, that can then suddenly be quite tricky. So that's probably the thing I'd say for thinking back, I think.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. So you mentioned blind spots a few minutes ago. I'm wondering if you remember what blind spots became apparent to you when you were being coached, or what blind spots kind of you're commonly helping people with.
I'm trying to remember. It was years ago now, but I can certainly remember one thing where I think for about 3 sessions in a row, I must have talked about something, and I remember my coach at the time sort of saying, like, just going to play it back to you. What I'm hearing is that, for each of the last 3 sessions you've talked about, and I can't remember what it was, but you've talked about this, like, talk to me about how important it is. And as I started talking, I was kind of like, what? That is literally the most important thing right now to me. Like, I hadn't necessarily walked into the session to talk about it. I was like, that is the most important thing. And it was kind of, and I was like, how? So then it was like, what should I be focusing on right now? It's like, I categorically need to be focusing on that right now. It was one of those things and you'd be like, how could you not know that? How could you not know that the most
Brain.
important thing was the most important thing? And I
Yeah.
kept trying to remember what the hell it was. It was something. And I couldn't believe. Yeah.
No, that's almost a more powerful anecdote. The fact you can't remember what it was, but it was the most important. I think there's a certain that's people talk about the magic of coaching, and I think the analogy I always come up with is sort of, have you ever been at a restaurant and you're looking between, say, 3 different meals and you're not sure which meal you're going to pick, and then the waitress comes over and you're like, oh no, I'm just going to have to pick, and then as soon as she asks you, you just say one, and it's like, I find that a lot with coaching. If you coach people and they, I've not really got anything to talk about, and then they sit there and you go, okay, what would you like to talk about? And then bang, they're straight into the most important thing. And often it is like it catches them by surprise, but it's that thing that maybe something in your subconscious or your gut tells you that's the thing I need to
think
figure
when
out right now.
it's just that when you start to ask questions, you because it's what's the most important thing for them at this particular stage in time. Like that's always going to be the key thing. Like, sometimes you'll find, I suppose, that sort of someone will say like, oh, I've got this challenge and I've got this challenge, and you'll say, okay, what do you want to work on first? And sometimes you haven't really noticed it, but you've expected they're going to say one of them. You're asking the question because you want to understand where they want to go, and you're going to be led by them and that sort of thing. But occasionally I found that someone says something and you're like, oh right, I would have thought that you would have gone with the other one. And you catch yourself going, oh, you didn't expect that. As a coach, you sort of almost catch yourself going, oh, you thought they were going to talk about blah. Because they said 2 things, and then you say that. Of course, it's what's. They might be perfectly comfortable solving the other problem, or they might have a way of doing it, or they might know that there's nothing that can be done until, or whereas this other problem might be something that's imminent and urgent and immediate, or something that they know they need to move forward now. So yeah, that being led by the individual is I guess a key part of it, right? But yeah, it is. But then you as an individual, you won't always know what the blind spots are, but by talking, when I say you'll sort of, I don't mean you'll give yourself away, but you will sort of, over time, you'll be articulating where you want to get to, what you're trying to do, what problems you have, and the coach can kind of pull out the themes or the threads that you've maybe missed and sort of hold it up for you to examine and say, hey, because I could have said, I can't remember what it was. He could have said, I've noticed that you've said this 3 weeks, and I could have said, oh no, it's just something I sort of, I complain about it, but actually it's fine. That could have happened with something completely different. But this one always stuck in my mind because I couldn't believe that I hadn't been focusing on. Do you know what I mean? As soon as I clocked it, I was like, I'd been working on, all the stuff I'd been working on was valid. It wasn't like I was like, you completed it, you don't know how to do your job. It was almost like based on the challenges I had, based on the problems I had, based on everything else. It was like, yes, that was the thing I needed to be sorting out, right? So, yeah.
That's really interesting. Segueing a little bit into your kind of personal journey and moving from being kind of, I guess you'd say, on the tools to becoming a coach. Tell us a bit more about that transition. What's that been like?
I think it's been really good, basically. I sort of really enjoy it. I think because I love solving this kind of early stage sort of sales puzzle, and because I love the kind of the person side of it, the person plugged into that mix. It's like there is an individual through which the sort of pressure, the decision making, the nuance, the gut is all running through, and it's like and I also kind of really enjoy that kind of, how do we optimize performance? How are we gonna ultimately deliver more revenue more quickly for the business? Through playing with the rules of the game that we have and the materials we have. I really, being able to work with, doing that with different people, it almost like multiplies it. Do you know what I mean? When I was doing it, it was fantastic. I was living it, whatever early stage puzzle I was solving, because I also sort of had like a minimum viable product, which is like, this is free, let's make money out of it. Australia was like sort of revenue new region, also done, I say like, first sales hire, so new. So when you're doing, I've done the new bit, the early bit, in a number of different ways, a number of different times, I suppose. when you're doing it, you're focused on one thing at once. Do you know what I mean? Whereas when working and coaching with other people, I get to really be doing it, but doing it multiple people, multiple puzzles, multiple challenges at once. So I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, and I basically do really enjoy it. Yeah.
And it sounds like you can really refine your kind of craft, over time, and kind of get better and better at it, right? Presumably, because you're coming across the same thing, having similar kind of conversations, and really becoming an expert in your field. Not that you weren't to begin with. It's just like, I think you were describing earlier how it keeps
exactly. I mean, there's
changing,
sort of moving. Obviously and any coach will sort of say, like, you never stop learning, right? I don't think you'd ever stop learning in almost any role. I think working with different people, you sort of see ever different ways of doing things. You see problems experienced in different ways, challenges experienced and overcome in different ways. You start to see what resonates, what helps people. So I think another thing that I sort of, over the last few years since I started training to be a coach, which is nearly 3 years ago now, and then since I've been initially doing it part-time, but then switched to full-time, you're always learning. There's always stuff to take on board, to learn, to develop, and I think that makes it just brilliant, right? It's endlessly interesting. I'm in an interesting space with work with really great people, really interesting people in really cool organizations trying to achieve sometimes difficult things or exciting things, or usually difficult and exciting things put together. So yeah, always learning.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. That it's been such a positive experience. And what advice would you give listeners contemplating similar changes in their life?
Everyone sort of probably looks at their own kind of life sort of in their way, don't they? They kind of they sort of see chunks or bits. And I think switching to startups, which is something that I look back and I'm like, I did that pretty early on in my career, but it's like my advice would be almost always just like go for it. You'll learn a lot, and worst case you can always go back. So if you're in your mind kind of contemplating a move to startups, if you're in a large organization and if things like more responsibility, more sort of flexibility, more kind of freedom to take risks, and both the good and the bad of that appeals, I'd be like, I'm a massive evangelist for that. I think the journey from individual contributor to leader, I'd be like, as I touched on earlier, I'd be like, get really clear on the type of leader you want to be, that kind of North Star concept. And the starting your own sort of thing, obviously switching to sort of effectively now running my own business, I think I'd say it's a roller coaster. So you're going to have, in general, it's good, but you're going to have sort of good weeks and bad weeks. It's going to be a bit of a roller coaster. So you're not going to change that. You need to find a way to kind of embrace the fact that, it's going to be a bit of a roller coaster. So yeah, find a way to embrace that would be on that chunk, I guess. That's what I'd probably say.
Yeah, that's really, they're going to be the highs are going to be high and the lows are going to be lower type thing, aren't they? And are there any sort of specific resources or support systems that you think were really crucial to your success?
I think obviously everyone's going to say friends and family. I think, and people you've worked with. I think something I've noticed, obviously, people sort of refer people to me and that sort of thing. That's kind of the nature of how these sorts of things work, I guess. Often people you've worked with, slightly less closely, their opinions and their perspectives can be quite useful. And sort of, they might be like, you know what, mate, when I worked with you, I always thought you were the best at this or something like that, and obviously, they're not your sort of close family or friends. So then, obviously you want to build you up, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Not like your mum saying
great,
you're amazing at everything.
You need to take it with a pinch of salt in a way, in terms of like you just. Yeah, so I found exactly, just brilliant at everything.
You're just amazing.
I think so. Yeah, you sometimes I found that you're talking to people like wider out to understand a bit more about that side of things. That sort of maybe surprised me a bit, but and I wouldn't necessarily have said it was a support network or anything like that, but it was sort of, there were interesting conversations and thought provoking, perhaps I'd say, and useful to me.
That's really interesting and quite prescient because, funnily enough, this happened to me the other day, and someone it was literally in the pub, and it was a throwaway comment, and they made a comment to me like, "Oh, do you know what? But you should do like this as well." And actually, it was one of those ones where it kind of struck something inside me that felt right, but then I didn't like kind of follow up and question them, and I really wish I had. And now I've got it on my list. I'm gonna have to ring them up and be like, you said that. What did you mean? And a bit, it's that whole thing about coming back to the kind of coaching. It's like people, the blind spots, and people see things in us that we don't see in ourselves sometimes. So actually, I think that's a great piece of advice. Just go and ask other people around you, what do you think I'm good at? What do you think, that's the positive side of it. What do you think I'm good at? What do you think I should do more of? If you were me, what would you do type thing? Because people can see it so much easier in other people than they can see it in ourselves. And I think for me, a part of that is I take my skill set for granted. So the stuff that I'm good at, I just think, I'm just, I don't connect with it because I'm like, that just comes easily to me. So it almost doesn't feel like work, but it's the stuff that doesn't feel like work that you're good at.
Yeah,
that
and
probably
it's
should do
that.
more
Yeah,
of.
I think there's a guy. I think he's called maybe Marcus Buckingham or Buckingham. I think something like that. And he has this concept of a strength is something that strengthens you, and a weakness is something that weakens you. So a strength isn't something you're good at; it's something that through doing it strengthens you, and likewise the weakness, right? And I think, and I that was a realization I had at one point, or well, having watched him, I had the realization. He sort of joined the dots, but if you're good at something, it doesn't necessarily mean you should do it. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll enjoy it. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's something you should focus on. And also, it's okay to be like rubbish at something. Like we've probably all got stuff that we're really rubbish at that we're really happy to do. Like I'm, always been sort of fairly awful at golf, but like I'm happy to be bad at it. Well, I'd rather be better, but I'd still enjoy it even though. Then there might be other things where you're like, I'm rubbish at that. I don't want to do it. It doesn't sort of. I just don't like it. I think there's that kind of element, which is what if you understanding like how other people, when you're helping other people with something and they think, oh, that's great, and you think that's really easy, really sort of straightforward or easy or well within your comfort zone. Just that recognition can sometimes be interesting. It's like, oh, you know what? Actually, yeah, I hadn't realized that other people found that in any way a challenge. You know what I mean? Because you're able to do it, right? So yeah, there's some insight in there somewhere in that. I'm not sure. I'm wandering around it, but I can't find it. But there's definitely something in there.
No, definitely. So what about what's the future hold for you then? Like, what's your vision? What's the kind of next thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really enjoying what I'm doing. So I think it's basically this. I've got some kind of some goals and some things I want to hit and that side of things. But yeah, it's really kind of more of this really. I think for me, I didn't know what I wanted to do. It took me quite a long time to find a spot where I was like, actually, this sort of is the intersection that works really well for me. And so I think just enjoying it, making it a success, continue to learn, that sort of thing. I think that's probably my kind of goal really. Sounds a bit boring really, that, but yeah.
Yeah, it sounds great. I mean, so I'm going to ask you now to provide your freedom challenge to myself and the listeners. I have mentioned this ahead of time, so I'm hoping you've come up with something. Have you?
Okay, so
great, good. What is it?
I think it's going to sound quite sort of simple or basic. So, but bear with me, give it a try. So, for what I say is for 3 full evenings this week, or if you can do it every day, if you really want to push it, if you like, sounds simple. Resist the urge to check Slack, email, your CRM system, whatever it is, after 6 p.m. Right. So put your phone away in another room. Be genuinely present with your family, your partner, your friends. So no work talk allowed. And then notice how it feels to do that, right? So both the good and the bad, right? It might be easy, it might be hard, but there'll be some learnings either way, depending on how you sort of interact and engage with that challenge. So yeah, I sort of, there was a number of challenges I was sort of thinking of, but I think that one's sort of in a week, that one's something you can try and then see how it feels.
Like that one. Let's say no
Oh yeah.
weekends as well, because that feels like a bit of
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
cheat.
definitely. Okay,
Got to
yeah.
be
So Monday,
weekdays,
Wednesday,
surely.
Friday, or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or
Yeah,
Monday to Friday if you think you can. Yeah.
exactly. No, I really like that one, and I think it's really important that we do that from time to time. And I like the way you've framed that in terms of just analyzing what does it do, not necessarily good or bad, but just what difference does it make if you do that. I've certainly struggled myself with just checking the phone, and if you definitely notice if you do manage to break the cycle, it just gets better. And if it's an upward spiral and a downward spiral, isn't it? If you keep checking your phone, then it leads to keep more checking the phone. And guess what? When you send more messages out, you get more
Very true.
responses back. That's another thing to keep in
Yeah,
mind,
very true.
which keeps the cycle going. So yeah, thanks very much for that. Okay, well, I will give that a go and feed back how I got on with that. Well, that's been a really interesting chat. It's really good to catch up with you, Dave. Loads of good stuff in there about leadership. And is there somewhere people can find you? I'll put a link to your to the website and the
Yeah, I think LinkedIn
the
best.
description
So yeah,
below. Will
just
I?
pop me you can pop me a DM on LinkedIn, or that's be the best. So it's just David Ascott, and then it's Ascott Coaching. So yeah.
Great. I'll just put the link to the LinkedIn. Yeah, if anyone's a sales looking for a sales leaders coach, then yeah, definitely get in touch with Dave. And no, thanks very much for being
Yeah,
on the
great to catch up,
podcast,
man.
and really appreciate your time.